So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first installment of our series, Healing Invisible Wounds. Tonight's theme is Culture Code, and we'll have a wonderful panel here to have a conversation about social justice and kind of what it means to heal and to come together as a community and unite in the fight for social justice. I am going to start by introducing myself and the panelists. My name is Nicquel Ellis. I am a senior writer for CNN covering race and equality. And our first panelist is Terence Lester. He is a speaker, activist, author, and thought leader in the realm of systemic poverty. He is the founder of Love Beyond Walls, a not-for-profit organization focused on poverty awareness and community mobilization. His campaign, Love Sinks In, provides hand-washing stations for the homeless and has been featured on Good Morning America, CNN, NBC, MLK 50, and TV One, and in Essence, Reader's Digest, Black Enterprise, and Upworthy. Our next panelist is Brandon Butler. Brandon is the CEO of Butter.atl, Atlanta's cultural channel. Brandon Butler leads the creative vision and day-to-day operations, producing culturally relevant content. Brandon holds a bachelor's in information technology from Georgia Southern University, an MBA from Georgia Tech, and certifications from Beijing University and the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. And Brandon has a wealth of experience in business. He's also a well sought after public speaker and is no stranger to award-winning accomplishments from Webbies to Ad Age and beyond. Next, we have Ekemini Uwan, who is a public theologian. Ekemini is the co-host of Truth's Table podcast, alongside Michelle Higgins and Dr. Christina Edmondson. Her writings have been published in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, Huffington Post Black Voices, Christianity Today, and The Witness, a Black Christian collective, just to name a few. Her insights have been quoted by CNN, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and The New Yorker, among other publications. Thank you to all of our wonderful panelists for being here today. I know I kind of want to start off by saying that, I'll have questions for the panelists, but I also want this to kind of be an organic conversation. And once we get done with the panel talk, we will open questions to the audience for Q&A. I think that the last year has been really heavy for us in the Black community, given that all that has happened with the racial reckoning and the uprisings and the death of George Floyd, and then just last month, the trial for the officer charged with killing George Floyd, who was ultimately convicted. And so I just think it's just been a lot for us to have to process. And I think it's been referred to as, this kind of the second wave of the civil rights movement, because, police killings have been one thing. There's also been an attack on voting rights and so many other, injustices that we've all had to deal with just in the last year. So, but I kind of want to start by talking to Terence about his book. Terence's book was released yesterday. The title is When We Stand, The Power of Seeking Justice Together. And I want Terence to kind of talk about what we can all learn from the book and what inspired you to write it.
Yeah, it's a great question. You're in fact right. It's been a reckoning over the past year from, just being more aware of the disparities that exist within the context of communities across this country and globally. It has also revealed to us many of the apparent differences that so many people have, whether politically or socially. And I think one of the issues that many people are faced with right now is what I call social media trauma. Right from the palm of a person's hand with a technological device, you can encounter injustices literally by the 10s or 20s or 30s, all from the palm of your hand. And what that does to people is that it not only weighs them down, but it creates this type of trauma that becomes internalized, where people look at the issues of our times or the injustices that we see in the world, and they literally become paralyzed. They're left questioning and asking questions like, "What can I do to actually make a difference? How do I contribute anything to change the narratives or what I'm actually seeing in society and culture?" And I guess one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book is because I wanted to encourage people to connect with other people who are doing important work, offering their gifts, their talents, and their skill sets in connection with other people to actually make real-time differences against the evils that we see. And so my heart is, to see local change happen within the context of communities on a local level, but also to inspire people all around the country to see themselves as needed in the fabric of social change, as opposed to just putting off social change on some leader or some politician or some one person that they think can actually make the change. I think it takes all of us. And I think that is the heart of what M.L. King was communicating when he said that we're a part of the world house.
Thank you, Terence. So this question is for anyone who on the panel who wants to weigh in. But you all are you're writers, you are podcast hosts, you all are members of the media space. And I'm just curious, what has it been like kind of being the middleman between the media and the community, the Black community?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I'll tell everybody like this. Last year was probably the most challenging year of my career. Like you said in the bio, my background is actually in technology. I've been doing web development technology. I was doing all types of things. And then just kind of through a number of situations, I ended up, starting and leading and helping grow in Butter. And, I tell people all the time, we didn't sign up for this, but when it happened, we made a very quick and very intentional decision to kind of lean into what was going on. Suddenly last year, the whole world realized that, racism and racial inequality were a thing. And that was a lot to process. I can even remember myself a few moments where I had to kind of take a step back, as a Black man with, a young son with kids. I can remember the Ahmaud Arbery shooting. The first time I saw that, my job is social media. And I remember I was actually on a conference call, and I was the only Black person on the conference call. And I literally saw a man hunted down and executed, or, lynched essentially. And then I remember the same thing, when the Rashad Brooks situation happened, because Butter has been so, tied into Atlanta culture. I was actually asleep, and I started getting text messages from people that were in the drive-through, actually sending me the footage like as it happened. A lot of that footage actually ended up on TMZ. It ended up on the news the next day, and I was looking at it on my cell phone at 1 a.m. trying to understand what was going on. So even when I tried to turn it off, it came directly into my inbox. So I think what I had to do was kind of take a step back and really kind of evaluate what place Butter wanted to play for that. And to Terrence's earlier point, we never want to become the next world star. We have no desire to to help syndicate trauma. Instead, we decided to really become a repository of organized information and activism. So we really leaned into different initiatives that we started and really just try to kind of change, not necessarily the narrative, but redirect that energy towards something more positive. So whether it was getting people more engaged in social justice protests, whether it was our 14 Ways in 14 Days initiative that highlighted local nonprofits, or just the steady kind of drumbeat of content that we put out, around social justice issues, from everything from racial inequality to voting rights. It was something that we had to kind of adjust to, and I'm glad that we did. And I think, it really helped provide a lot of value and support for Atlanta, specifically in a really tough time.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
Yeah, I would echo the fact that 2020 was a year. It was definitely a difficult year. I think when I think about mainstream media and America or the United States, let me say, as a whole, I think of those two similarly, in that the ways that Blackness is packaged to us is that it's mediated through whiteness, which involves paternalism, voyeurism, where Black pain, Black death is commodified, monetized, and so our very real pain and lynchings that we're actually seeing continue to be played on a loop and on a loop and on a loop. And so I made a concerted decision. I think it was back when Philando Castile was lynched, that I wasn't watching these videos anymore. I just was like, I cannot and I will not be desensitized to Black death, to Black pain. I will not internalize the dehumanization of Black people, Black bodies. And so when I move away from mainstream media and into Black media spaces, especially, with my show, Truth Table, that's a space where, yes, we do talk about white supremacy and racism, right? Because those are interlocking oppressions that we experience. And I just, you can't really escape that necessarily. But in some ways, we try to provide an oasis, if you will, and a refuge, a place where particularly Black women in particular, and then Black men by extension, and then whomever else would like to come gets the standing room section, right? They get the opportunity to just hear us talk about the things that are going on, right? And talking about it from a biblical perspective, in some ways that I think maybe you don't always get necessarily. Depending on what kind of Black church you go to, you might not get that from the pulpit. But if you come to Truth Table, you sit at Truth Table, you'll hear us talk about some of these things. And then sometimes we make a deliberate choices not to talk about that. And let's talk about something that's fun. Let's talk about something that's full of joy. Let's try to honor our dignity and humanity by basking in what Black joy is. And so we try to strike that balance, which can be difficult when you're inundated, right, with lynchings upon lynchings. We had Breonna Taylor, we had Ahmaud Arbery, Rashad Brooks, George Floyd. That happened near my birthday, right? And so all of these things just continue to compound and compound. But at least here in this place, we had to make a deliberate decision on what we're going to discuss, what we're not going to live into. We see it, but we want to turn our gaze and help to lift the gaze of our people toward things that are life-giving and life-sustaining, or else it's going to be really hard to continue in to get the stamina and the resilience that you need in order to continue to fight for justice when you continue to see your people slain, and knowing, wait a minute, that could be me. If you're continuing to take that in, it's going to be hard for you to continue to run this race and stand together, as as Terence encourages us to do in his book, When We Stand.
Thank you both for those wonderful answers and your insight on that. I also want to talk about kind of how, the last year with all these uprisings and this movement, there's been a lot of advocacy, a lot of groups coming out and advocating for equality, advocating against police brutality against Black people. And, all these activists that have come out, have emerged with, their platforms. I'm just curious, as when thinking about the power of the title, rather, of Terence's book, The Power of Seeking Justice Together, how can we unite? Can we better unite in the fight for racial and social justice?
Yeah, I think to Ekemini's point is, I think we have to be truthful, that it just doesn't happen in a vacuum or in one conversation, or realizing that these are problems that communities are facing all around the country. only when we tune in to see because of something traumatic happening on the news. I think this is something that we need to reorient ourselves with leaning into these conversations, as Ekemini pointed out, on a weekly basis. This is not just something that is solely for entertainment. These situations that we continue to see around the country are actual, circumstances that people who are living and breathing are faced with and plagued with every single second. And so for me, I would like for people to lean in and to have these important conversations cross-culturally within the context of our own community. I remember, gosh, I was watching the news and my son comes up to me and he's 9 years old. And he points at the television screen and he says, "Why are there tanks on the television screen?" Right. And that's the moment that I really realized that I had to have a conversation with my 9-year-old son, and started doing research and understood that, Black boys or Black children in general start to develop these racial conversations as early as 6 and 7 years old. I mean, it took me back to realizing the first time I started having talks from my uncles or Black men about, these things of how to conduct and carry yourself when you're out and you're young. I can remember things like, always leave your hands out of your pocket if you walk into the store. If you're about to purchase something, have the money visible. I mean, all of these things that I had to have this conversation with my son. And the thing that really started to weigh heavy on me is when I actually started to speak out and speak up about these real realities that we are faced with within the context of the Black community. I got a lot of backlash, right? I had people sending me all types of death threats and on social media, saying all types of hateful things, that I was being divisive and all sorts of things. And, what I realized is that some people are not ready to have this conversation. But that does not excuse the fact that it is a real reality in the lives of Black and brown people all across the country. And so, yeah, with the book, I'm hopeful to open these types of conversations and open these types of dialogues so we can see the injustice itself as the evil that is plaguing community that needs us to have this interlocking locking the arms of one another with your neighbor to actually take a stand against the injustice instead of the people that we view as the enemy, right?
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are now in the age of community, kind of like Terence talks about in the book, right? And communities create this exponential impact because they're really tied together by passion. But, the reality is we start to get there by starting with empathy, more specifically empathy for our community. One of the things I realized last year was how traumatized I had actually been as a Black man. And to Terence's point, when I actually started thinking about all the conversations that my father and, men and family members of my life have had about me, about how to carry myself, how to not be perceived as a threat. I can even remember at Georgia Tech, people having conversations with me about making my other MBA classmates comfortable because I was one of the few Black students in class. And, it was weird because looking back on it, especially after what happened last year, you realized, how much trauma you were actually, kind of living with and like dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And so I think, again, it really starts with, empathy, one for each other, understanding that, as black people, we're all, challenged. We all have, similar challenges, but also, unique challenges. And so, we need each other. We need communities to create that, exponential impact. It doesn't matter if your community is, Dogecoin, Bitcoin, or Black Lives Matter. That community is super powerful, which we've been, seeing with everything that's happened in the stock market, all the way back to everything that's happened with social justice. And so, I think if anything, when people come together with just intention for the present and paying attention to the future and tying that in with passion, great things can happen. But again, I just really believe the first step is to start with empathy, is to, understand, do a better job of understanding, each other, to do a better job of understanding ourselves. And again, like once we kind of, as I told somebody, the biggest flex is really understanding your own mind. So, really, understanding yourself, understanding what's important, understanding, what you can provide to your community, and then connecting with other people to really build that exponential impact, I think are, some of the first steps we can kind of do to lead with more empathy and really start to kind of, make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think on that note, if I can, sorry, Nicquel, am I okay to respond? Yeah, I believe Brandon's absolutely right. Empathy is so important. And I would just add on to that, love. I think we gotta lead with love, and I would start internally within our own community. I think in some ways we struggle in some ways, if we're honest, to love ourselves. And if we don't love ourselves, then there's no way we're going to love each other, like other Black people. And I'm going to get outside of our community in a minute, but I do think it's important for us to love ourselves truly, as we have been created and made to be. I think it's step one. I don't think that we could take for granted or assume, because we have all this Black girl magic and my melanin is popping and flexing in my complexion and all of these cultural colloquial phrases that are affirmative of who we are, and Black boy joy, right? And all these things, Black boy fly, which thank God we didn't have that back in the 80s, right? But I'm dating myself here. But I do think we can sometimes take for granted or assume that, we have all these things that, this love of self is automatic, and it's not. I think there's a sense in which there has been an agenda that's been mitigated against our people from before we even enter into this world, that is hell-bent on us hating ourselves, loathing ourselves. And I testify as one who used to be self-hating, right? Especially as a dark-skinned Black woman. And so I'm intimately acquainted with what I'm speaking about. But what I'm saying is that we can't take for granted or assume that that's an automatic, and that just comes automatically by osmosis. It just doesn't, for us in a world where we are oppressed, maligned, disenfranchised. We are meant to internalize, the agenda is for us to internalize that oppression. But we have to resist that. And the way that we resist that is by loving ourselves, and then not only loving ourselves, but then loving our neighbor, right? Loving, what I'm saying, everybody on our block, right? And then that begins to extend to everybody else because of our own common humanity. We ain't no better than nobody else. They ain't no better than us. And so being able to see that because you are a human being endowed with intrinsic worth and dignity, I am to honor you. I am to respect you. I am to give you the honor that is due to you, baseline. Because you are a human being, just like I'm a human being. And so that applies outside of our community, right? To even our Asian brothers and sisters who are currently mercilessly being attacked simply because they are Asian, and being attacked from all kinds of different racial groups, not just white folks, Black folks, Latinx people. I mean, they are being assaulted from everywhere, in every corner, right? You're very familiar with this in Atlanta. We already know about what happened just a few months ago with the at the spas, and so I think in some really real ways we have to understand that it is love. It is love that moves us toward compassion, and compassion has legs, and it moves toward those who are suffering, right? And then And then we do justice. And then this becomes a lifestyle. And so love is the motivation. Love is the why. Knowing that the same oppression that is entangling my Black brothers and sisters is eventually going to ensnare, or is, if it isn't already, which I contend that it already is ensnaring, non-Black people of color, like that. We are all together. We are bound together as one. And I know that can be hard to see in a world that is so built on capitalism and stratification, and that's meant to be what's mine is mine. It's about me and mine, and I don't care about what happens to y'all over there because you don't move nothing over here. I know that that's the mentality, because that's just the mentality that capitalism breeds. But the reality is that we are actually one. We are actually, we belong to each other. So to what do we owe one another? Love, respect, compassion, honor. We start from there. Then we begin to really lock arms and do some things together as one.
Thank you, Ekemini. Those are all really good points and really good insight there. And I'm happy that you also brought up the fact that it isn't just the Black community that's been faced with trauma in the last year. That our Asian American community has also been dealing with a lot with the attacks and the violence in their community. So I'm glad that you did bring that up. I also want to talk about the fact that, I kind of feel like during uprisings and movements of the past, people have, looked for leadership. They've looked for someone to tell them how to respond, or, what to do in times of racial strife and so much adversity that's happening in our community right now. They're looking for guidance. And I'm just curious, do you all believe that today that we have the leadership that we need and the involvement that we need in our community for folks to have that guidance on how to move forward?
I can, if you don't mind, I can jump in. I think the circumstances of our fight have changed. I don't think the fight has changed, but I think the circumstances have. So you think about the civil rights era, you're thinking about, they're fighting segregation. We're no longer we're not fighting that now, right? But I think one of the consequences, if I may be so bold, of desegregation is that we are no longer together, right, in communal spaces, like meaning by force, right? So now we have the choice to move out of certain neighborhoods and to move in. Obviously, there are some barriers, to these things, redlining and, housing markets. And so let's just control for that. But I'm just saying, if those things are not, very obvious or clear barriers, that you do have the choice of moving, right? And so you're not in places where we typically would used to gather all the time, whereas it was church, right? You went to school together, you're in the same neighborhood, you're going to the same grocery stores. And so you always had these communal spaces where Black folks were always together, always interacting. At that time, it was by force because of Jim Crow. But now there were post Jim Crow. We're not as, how can I say, we don't have that, I would say that connectivity and the collectivity that would be necessary in order to lift up one singular or two singular or three singular, leaders, if you will. And so the justice fight has been democratized, I think, in some ways because of social media, because we're all in different places. I say because of globalization as well. And because social media has made the world so small, the fight looks different. And so I think in some very real ways, I think there were some gains and there were some losses. If I'm honest, I don't think that, I think that there were some things that we really did lose. And I think some of that was that those communal spaces of gathering. And as people are not as connected maybe to the church anymore, and then not so confined or connected to neighborhoods, even within urban centers or within the inner city now, they're more so spread out in the burbs because it's a little bit cheaper out there. I think we lose a lot of that that political education, that communal kinship, if you will, and so we don't have the circumstances or the preconditions that would actually necessarily raise up one singular leader. A lot of these people came out of the church, so we can't. They came out of the Black church. We cannot forget that. And it's such that a lot of people in our generation aren't necessarily connected to the church anymore. So it is more democratized now. And so I think people have to, like Terence encourages in the book, that we all have a part to play. And so I think that requires us to look within, I would say, and then also look without. Who is confirming your calling? What are you passionate about? What keeps you up at night? What are the things that that you continue to turn over your head? You can't. That won't let you. What are the things that won't let you go? What are those things? And when you identify that, then you begin to make small steps toward figuring those things out, solving those solutions. And then there's other people, that will gather around those same maybe justice issues or that same passion. And before you know it, you have a movement, or you're joining with others that have those same passions and things. So I don't think it necessarily has to be a bad thing, but you do have to do, I think, a little bit more digging and work on your part in our own cultural context now.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I mean, I think in short, do we, have the leadership in place today? Absolutely not. But you have to ask yourself why, and that's because systemic oppression and inequality weren't created in a day, and they're not going to be able to be solved in a day. For decades and decades, if not even centuries almost, there have been systems in place to quickly identify and silence the voice of anybody that did try to step up and become a leader in those communities. And, to a point, a lot of those leaders did previously come from churches, but in the church community. But you see now as we've gotten more and more disconnected from that, whether it's with the pandemic or just, people's attitudes changing, you have to look in new places for leaders. I mean, we can go down the list. I mean, we've all seen Judas and the Black Messiah. We've all seen Billie Holiday versus the United States. We all remember Tiger Woods versus the Masters. We remember Barack Obama versus everybody. For any kind of Black leader to get in a position, one to even get there, they're going to face tons of adversity if they even make it to that point. The reality is, economics, education, justice, media, and politics are really the pillars of any strong community. And while we do have, leaders, there are not, definitive voices, especially in the Black community right now. And one, that's because of just some of the, again, systemic things that have been put in place, but also, the internet has really democratized voices. So again, when MLK was going around, there wasn't an internet. We don't know if there was another, MLK out in Southern California that had another message that could also get out there and kind of create, his own audience and create his own following, right? So I think if anything, it's really important now that in order for us to get those people, we do have to start looking around and start kind of looking internal and really understanding, that in the past, those leaders were kind of identified and groomed and supported. And it's very often that, again, because of just systemic things in the way that we operate, even if somebody does step up the lead, they're very quick to get torn down if you're a Black person, right? And so again, how do we, lead with love and empathy when people do try to step up and help kind of take us to the next space? But in reality, though, we do need to really, and I say we, I mean we as a community, really need to take the steps to start to engage and groom and embrace the next group of leaders. Those kids you think might be weird now or doing their own thing, or they might not be paying attention. They're actually a lot more engaged than you might realize. And, even as whether we believe it or not, like I tell people all the time right now, Biggie is on the old school, on the oldie station now. All my favorite Bad Boy and Outkast songs are coming on the old stations now. So again, we're kind of transitioning. And it's important that, we embrace the next, era of leaders and understand they might not look like us. They might not say things the way that we would said it, but if they are making a concerted effort to step out, to become engaged, to care about issues, and to just try to rally, groups of people. I mean, that's, again, going back to community. Communities are, small groups of all engaged people with similar characteristics and cultures, right? So, just because this person is embracing or engaged in a community that you might not have heard of, or they coming from a different place, they look different, especially as, Black and brown people. Let's just make it an effort to hear them out, understand where they come from, try to see what their real message is, and really try to embrace it so that we can start to, groom those next series of leaders, because, we need them, and we don't really have the luxury of, running everybody into the ground to see if they can make it. So, I think we could all do a much better job, and, just keeping an eye out. And when you see people that are stepping up and that, even show a glimmer of hope or a glimmer of desire to want to kind of step into this arena, we need to do everything we can to kind of surround them with love, embrace them, and support them. Because it's going to be a tough ride, but it's going to be, something that we all need as a people in a community.
Very true, Brandon. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Yeah, I echo everything that Brandon and Ekemini has brought forth. The thing that I would love us to think about in terms of leadership is to not necessarily put leadership on like a platform. I think that leadership can come from Uncle George within the context of a community. It can come from a person right now who may be a waitress at a local restaurant. Leadership can emerge from the local high school hallways. Leadership can be found in the context of an organization that is doing real trench work. Leadership can be any and everywhere. And I think sometimes we become so, used to looking to one certain person or some type of figure or some person who has the respect or the ears of a lot of people, that we actually overlook so many wonderful people who are in the context of community doing the organizing and doing the type of work. I mean, how do you win an election? It's just not one person. It's the persons who stood in line and ensured that people didn't tire out. It's the persons who made the phone call. How do you stand up to bad policies? It's the people who are calling local politicians. It's all of these little pieces connected together that actually makes the world a better place. And I would like for us to start considering highlighting people who may not have the platforms or the spotlight or are seen as the central figures, because we need to remind people that it takes all of us. Obviously some people may have their faces seen more than others, but that does not discount your contribution, is the message. That all of us working in the context of community, offering up whatever we're able to contribute, makes the fabric of social change. It just doesn't come from one place. And even thinking about the civil rights movement, I think about the Montgomery bus boycott, who actually there was a community of people that created the first Ubering system, right? When they were standing up against the oppression happening in that time and decided to opt out of public transportation, but use each other's vehicles, right? To take each other to the stores and to drop each other off. And sometimes, not even driving and walking with their neighbors for the sake of safety. It was this entire community stepping up that actually brought about the type of change that led to policy change that happens to be what Ekemini mentioned. And so we can't forget that every single person matters, and there's a leader somewhere who may be listening to this, or who may don't even have a social media platform or whatever. I just think that we need to look to our neighbors, as well as in the context of our own communities, to find people who are actually doing the work. Because there's a difference between figureheads, right? People who are viewed as the leader versus those who are actually doing the actual work that it takes to sustain any type of social change.
Very good point, Terence. I think that's a lesson for us all to kind of take heed to, is that it doesn't, just because the person has a lot of followers on social media, it doesn't mean that they are actually doing the work that needs to be done. So thank you for making that point, Terence. I want to let the audience know that if you do have any questions, could you please submit those now, and we will try to get to those as we are moving along here. So just Q&A, we can start that up soon if you guys have any questions you would like to ask our panelists. But for my next question, I want to talk about healing. I think that was so much going on in the fight for equality in the last year. We talked earlier about the trauma and how it's just been a lot to process, and people don't talk enough about, in my opinion, the importance of taking care of your own mental health and even considering whether you should be going to therapy or not. And I think that in some spaces, the conversation has become stigmatized because we were raised, many of us were raised to lean on our faith and to just go to church to get your answers and to deal with your whatever issues you're going through emotionally or mentally. So what do you all think it means to heal? And, how can we as a community, practice healing during such fragile times?
Well, I'm definitely for therapy. I think everybody needs therapy, regardless of your family dynamics and upbringing. I just think that life in this world is just difficult. We are faced with oppression. We're faced with pains and hurts. We hurt other people. We are hurt by people, right? And so you're not gonna go through this world unscathed. You're just not. I don't care if you got a silver spoon in your mouth or not. Joy is joy and pain is pain. And so I do think that therapy is for everybody. I do want to put that out there. But I do think that it's important. Your mental health is so very important in this fight. And if you don't care for your mind, if you're as a justice worker, you may lose it. And so, there's a reason why justice work takes a toll on people. Where there's a reason why a lot of justice advocates and activists die young. Because of the stresses aside from the systemic racism that actually targets them and where they get assassinated and killed. That's another subject. But if they are not assassinated and killed, then there's ways that you internalize a lot the stress, right? The trauma. The body does indeed keep the score. And so I think it's very, very, very important to be able to do therapy, and yes, thank God for the church. I'm a Christian. I love the church. I'm committed to the church. And I love the Bible. And the Bible is sufficient. It's sufficient for what it speaks to, right? It's not a DSM-4 book. And so we do need, God has provided us therapists to help walk alongside us so we can do prayer and therapy. These things are not divorced from one another. They work together perfectly. And I do think that is very, very important for our people. And I will say, I think we've made some great strides. I actually think that mental health is something that's coming up in a lot of conversations that I've been in. A lot of Black people are much more open to therapy than they were, I would say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. And so that's really encouraging to see. And I hope that continues. And even I hear, even in sermons, pastors actually encouraging congregants to get therapy, right? Because your pastor's not meant to be everything to you. Your pastor's not God. And so we have actual practitioners that specialize in mental health, and there's no shame. If you do have a mental health diagnosis, there's no shame in taking medication for that. Your mind, just like other chemical reactions that happen in our body, diabetic, high blood pressure. If you need to take medication to be able to stabilize your mental health, by all means do it. There is no shame in that. But I would say, in addition to mental health, caring for the body is also very important too. as well. So let's not neglect the body either. So taking care of the body, moving your body, right? Moving a lot of that stress out of that body, getting a lot of that tension and trauma out of there too. Let's not underestimate the power of moving our body and the impact that has on our brains, right? Releasing endorphins to help lift us out of some depressive moods that can come as a result of seeing a lynching on your phone. So let's make sure that we're taking care of our mental health as well as our physical health.
Very good points, Ekemini. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Yeah, I was very, very good points. I think therapy is essential because trauma can raise your cortisol levels, which has a direct impact on your organs. Specifically in the Black community, stress causes faster heart rates. It raises your blood pressure. It has been known scientifically to cause diabetes and other illnesses that plague the Black and brown community, as well as I just think we need to destigmatize what therapy actually is. I remember early on, growing up, there was this phrase, that if you're going to talk about your problems, then something's wrong with you. I think we need to dead that notion and really see therapy as a process of unpacking and getting perspective on the trauma that has actually been afflicted upon us, right? Also learned early on during this pandemic that you have to have intentional practices as it relates to caring for the physical body. I remember early on, I started to realize as we were slowing down, but we were speeding up as an organization. I lead an organization that has been on the front lines. And I realized that I was exhausting myself in the care of others. And the last person that I was actually taking care of was myself. And so I made the shift to start adopting more physical practices, like going to the gym, going on long walks in the morning, creating intentional time where I could de-stress and decompress from the day. Actually incorporated, healthier eating, being more cognizant about the consumption of the food that I was intaking. But it also led to me realizing that I was consuming a bunch of things, through my earwaves and through my eye waves. And so I had to really dial back and cut down even on the things that I was consuming on social media. I had to be intentional about knowing what triggered emotions within me, knowing the things that would put me in a mood that would be really low. And so I think as a person is thinking about doing justice work, not only do you need to care for your mind and your physical bodies, but you also have to be very intentional about what you're consuming, because a diet is more than just food. It's who you're talking to, it's what you're watching, is what you're listening to, is what you believe about yourself. It's who you're in close proximity to, which creates the safe space where you can be vulnerable about things that you may be dealing with. And it's also how we engage with therapy to help us process. So I think intentionality, we have to be more intentional about the ways in which we care for ourselves as we show up to serve other people in community.
Thank you, Terence. Really good points. I mean, I agree that self-care is so very important during times like this. We have a question from an audience member. Frank Hansen asks the panel, there has been so much psychological damage done to the Black community this last year. How do we help those who do not have the means or the financial stability to get help?
Well, I would say that it's important. I think it's in some ways it's one thing, to say, I see you, I support you, hang in there, let me know if you need anything, right? We say that, and I don't think that we mean to be dismissive, and I think it's well intentioned. But if you can be the change, if you can be the bridge that can make the difference in that person's life, then why not, provide in a tangible way for that individual within your community who is having a hard time, who is suffering in light of what's happening. I think there are resources out there. If it's regard to finances, then by all means, the church should be stepping in. If it's the church, if this person's in the church, there's benevolent funds that should be able to help this person as they are, struggling, right, to get some financial stability in their life. If it's about therapy and it being inaccessible due to finances, if you have the means to help support that person to pay for that, by all means do that. But then there's also this foundation entitled Loveland Foundation that actually has a therapy fund that's specifically for Black women. I'm not sure if they do it for Black men, but they may know of another foundation that maybe does support Black men, where they provide therapy at no cost, where they're the ones that actually fund and pay for therapy for Black women. So it's called Loveland Foundation. I believe it's .org. Let me verify that. Yeah, the Loveland Foundation .org that helps to support and provide therapy funding for Black women, because we know therapy is still very expensive and out of reach for a lot of our people. And then and if people are maybe like, okay, I have the means for therapy, but I haven't gone that route yet, I would commend therapy for blackgirls.com. On that website, there's a directory where Black folks can find a therapist in their area, and a licensed therapist I think those are just Black therapists, I believe, that they can look into possibly going to therapy with them. And then lastly, if none of those options that I put forward are an option, this woman by the name of, and a friend by the name of Sheila Wise Rowe released a book last summer entitled Healing Racial Trauma. And that book is very helpful. And I think it could be a nice bridge until somebody can get in with a therapist. And that was very helpful. It's a book that I went through with some women that I was mentoring last summer. And it came out right on time as it was post Breonna, post Ahmaud, and post George Floyd. And so it was about last June that it came out, or June or July. And she's a therapist herself. And so she's helping us work through our racial trauma. She's a Black woman as well. And so I commend that book in this case. I normally wouldn't plug another book while we're plugging this book, but it's about racial trauma. So that's why I'm lifting it up.
Thank you, Ekemini. And actually, thank you for providing those therapy resources. I was just writing down the names of those websites, and I hope that some other folks were able to write those down too, for themselves, or just to share with friends and family who may be looking to get some therapy. Anyone else want to weigh in on any other ideas or thoughts on that? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna. Yeah, that's a really great book, Ekemini, and she's also a part of the InterVarsity Press family. Very timely read, and a great resource and tool for anybody who's thinking about processing your own racial trauma. I was thinking about the lack of resources as it relates to people without an address. It's really hard to get stable access to mental health counseling, dealing with people experiencing homelessness. And it's even harder to get access to those same resources when it comes to women and children who are without homes. It's a constant struggle. And I'm also thinking about the number of people who have been furloughed, who are still furloughed, who are still without work. Statistics are actually showing now that the residue from 2020 by 2023, we're going to see an increase in homelessness by 40%. And so while we are talking about, STEMI money or stimulus dollars or more resources to help people kind of sustain and navigate what this pandemic has done financially for people, we also need to include within the conversation the type of provisions for people to work through this type of trauma that we've all experienced. And I would specifically love to see that happen on the ground level as it relates to people who do not have an address.
Thank you for that, Terence. We are going to begin to wrap up here. But before we do that, we have a trailer for Terence's book that was released yesterday, and we are going to take a look.
I believe the book, When We Stand, will communicate this message to any individual who picks up the pages that they are needed. One of the reasons why I believe this message matters at this very moment is because, we're nearing the end of a pandemic, hopefully, and we can't lose the core message that we've learned going through all of the struggles and the hurdles and the heartache and the loss and the grief that we've experienced during COVID-19. I'm hoping that this message specifically resonates with people of faith because I believe that we have the hope of the gospel, we have good news, but also we need to display that in our actions. So we have this message that's able to communicate solidarity and togetherness, but ultimately God's love. And I'm so hoping and so excited to see how this message literally resonates with people who pick up the pages and go through these pages and understand that they are needed.
Thank you for sharing that. Anything else you want to add to that, Terence? And maybe you can let the audience know how they can get a copy of your book as well.
Yeah, sure. Just excited for anybody who listened and gained and gleaned anything. I want to thank my peers and colleagues, Brandon and Ekemini, for their wisdom. Also want to thank you for hosting. And if you want to check out When We Stand, The Power of Seeking Justice Together, I think it's a great primer book that explores a lot of different social injustices, but also gives very practical ways for you to care for yourself, but also connect with people in community. I think the real change that we're all desiring to see happens locally and spreads nationally and globally. You have to ask yourself, what are you even doing right now as it relates to the context and community that you are living in? I think one of the things that is robbing many people from offering up anything to contribute to the fabric of social change is busyness, right? It's not about willingness, it's about availability. Many people are just spread too thin. And so I'm hoping that the message in this book will drive people into community, ultimately offering up whatever it is that they're bringing to the table to create social change. So if you want to check it out, obviously you can pick the book up wherever books are sold or physical stores. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Terence, and thank you for writing this book and sharing it with us. And hopefully it can help us as a community. Thank you all for tuning in tonight for our panel. I hope that you all enjoyed the discussion and gained something or learned something from it, especially when it comes to the importance of healing as a community and coming together to unite because we are better together. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.